Okay, Margaret Mead in Early Gender Studies, Culture and Personality. Margaret Mead and Ruth Benedict did what is called cultural personality studies, in which they saw the behaviors, the language used, and I don't mean whether it's Japanese or English, I mean the terminology, the lexicon, the vocabulary used in that culture, the adjectives, the adverbs, how things are explained. Could actually be attributed to a personality of that culture. Western societies assume two gender roles, male and female. However, 3 or 4 genders are often accepted in other societies. The limitation comes with patriarchy. And patriarchy, the idea of male dominance, is false. Males aren't dominant to females. We are partners in this world. So to keep that up, one must keep the illusion up. And the idea of more than dominant male, subjective, or subjugated female then throws that whole thing off. That's why homosexuality and bisexuality is so frowned upon in patriarchal societies. When society assumes two gender roles, male and female, Western society does. However, 3 or 4 genders are often accepted in other societies. Gender refers to the socially and culturally prescribed and perceived ways that males and females are expected to behave. How do females act? How do males act? The culture determines the femininity and the masculinity, and how the behaviors should emerge and how they should relate to each other. Margaret Mead in New Guinea, the feminist anthropology movement led to rethinking how gender is treated. Margaret Mead lived from 1901 to 1978, developed the central anthropological principle that gender is a cultural construction. Key findings in New Guinea, the Arapesh, both sexes are expected to act in ways Americans consider feminine. The Muduguruma, both sexes were what American cultures would call masculine. Here's Margaret Mead and her husband in New Guinea. The Chumbuli, opposite of the U.S., males more dependent and vain. Females are more independent and concerned with providing for the family. What effects would this have on behaviors that are seen as attractive? The projection of what is feminine and masculine in a culture. It does affect how we see what is appropriate and inappropriate, what is attractive, what is unattractive, not only in dress, body language, but in language itself or behaviors. Does this affect behaviors that women find attractive as masculine traits? Ask yourself. Or behaviors that men would find attractive as feminine traits? Sex and gender. Sex is the biological aspect of being female, male, or other, assigned at birth based on external genitalia. Gender, a socio-cultural construction of masculine and feminine or other, and the roles and the qualities assigned to these roles. Gender roles, the task and behavior assigned by a culture to each sex. In each culture, there are genders, of course, but there are gender roles. The tasks in a society are divided by gender and by age. This is not because some are better suited, as much as it's divide up the task, you can get more done in a day and have more free time to play. Consider how we view behavior of sexes, genders. What is acceptable for each, and what is acceptable towards each? What is acceptable towards the feminine, and what is expected by the feminine? What is acceptable towards the masculine, or by the masculine? How do we view bisexuality, and how should bisexuals act? Or homosexuals, transsexuals, transgender, cross-dressers? How do we view those things? And remember, those values and how we view them are all made up. What is not made up is distinguishing between sex and gender, or what is sex. Here we have on the top row, we have chromosomes XX and XY. The mother's chromosomes are XX. The XX is female, the XY is male. The father's male chromosome is passed straight down to a male. And the X chromosome is also passed down, but can go to male or female. The Y, and so what we see here is the top, the mother and the father, and how these chromosomes go together to create the child, female or male. That's biological. That's sex. The sum of biological differences between male and female and other. Gender is the cultural and social classification of masculine and feminine. Gender roles culturally determined expectations of behavior if one is considered masculine or feminine or other gender. Cultural construction of gender. The idea that gender characteristics are not inborn but constructed within each culture. We often have the impression that our projection of what is masculine or feminine are not only genetic and unchangeable, but what God wanted and unchangeable. They are changeable. A society's gender ideology is its totality of ideas about sex, gender, and the natures of men and women, including their sexuality and the relations between the genders. Here we have coat racks on the right. Think about your sex as a coat rack, and then what you put on that coat rack as the gender. Factors affecting gender roles. Kinship, the connections, the allies, responsibilities. If you remember, we just talked about kinship and how important that is in human society, how it determines responsibilities and roles and obligations. So kinship also affects status, affecting gender roles. Rules of descent, connection to bearing and raising children that females have, associated residence patterns, patrilocal societies. Usually men have a higher status than matrilocal. So all these things play into gender roles in these kind of societies. Economic resources, control over livelihood. Who has control over resources? Ownership and transmission of property, the divisions of labor. Ideology, classification and values. Terms that lift males up. Terms that lift females up. Terms that keep females subservient. Terms that associate females with the feminine, with males with the feminine. Let's think about it this way. Think of all the derogatory terms there are towards males. There's a lot, right? I don't expect you to come up with a number, just the quantity is huge. Now, think of the derogatory terms towards females. And you've just seen that number more than double. This is because in our system, it is important to subjugate the feminine, subjugate females below the males. And if you need more evidence of this, go back to male terms that are derogatory and drag males down. How many of those associate them with the feminine? It is a constant dialogue that we have. Economy, kinship, ideology. Gender stratification in the U.S. The ways gendered activities and attributes are related to the distribution of resources, prestige, and power in a society. Here we have medium hourly wages. On the left, we have male-dominated occupations. On the right, female-dominated occupations. You'll see the entry level is about the same. And after that, the advancements are much quicker and much higher in males than they are in females. This is what is called the glass ceiling. No one sees this stoppage. It's not there. It's not talked about. It's not visible. but it happens in people's lives, in females' lives. What arguments justify men earning more than women in the workforce? The wage gap between men and women is a historic problem, and we are making progress in solving it. That makes it sound like it's just always been there, that it's nature, that it's the way it is, and gee, we're going to try, but we've really tried for the last few hundred years, and we're going to continue. What it's really saying is, it is embedded in our economic system. We are not going to change it. We are not going to examine it. We're not going to look at the root of this inequality, because then we'd have to change the dynamics of our culture. Problem. The wage gap has decreased because male salaries have not increased. Because after the 70s, wages stagnated. Credit was opened up, and it required that mothers go back to work, that the females go to work to make a living, because prices kept going up. And what this is pointing out, that since male wages stagnated, women entered at around the same spot. But again, as advances happened, they did not advance nearly as quickly. As young women entered the workforce, the gap in entry-level salaries decreased. The gap increases because women don't get the same opportunities as men, i.e., the glass ceiling. As more women go to college, the wage gap will decrease. Problem, women who have completed 2 years of college, on average, earn less than $40,000 a year, compared to men with a high school diploma earning over $43,000 a year. Women choose careers that pay low salaries compared to careers men choose. Studies comparing salaries of men and women in the same profession reveal that men are paid more as well. And this is well documented. Even though we hear lots of denial about it in our society. And that denial comes from male supremacists. Those that think males should be ahead of the household, rule, make the money, and determine who's going to get what. What economic consequences of institutional sexism for women? What are the economic consequences? Projected loss of earnings over a 40-year career. Women compared to men with their education. Women with a high school diploma, over the course of 40 years, will lose $393,000 compared to a male. Women with a bachelor's degree, $654,000 in 40 years lost. And women with a professional degree, over a 40-year period, could lose $1 million compared to man's earnings. Income and divorce. Now let's take that disparity in wages and look at divorce and single parents. 2004 government study. Women with college degrees, both bachelor's and master's, average $42,000 a year. Men earn on average $77,000 a year. Now, fathers are almost always required to provide child support. Only 40% provide full payments in the first year. 26% make partial payments. After 1 year, almost half of the fathers paying child support stop altogether. So you have females making much less than men. They are more often than not the single parent. Now they have to make less, provide child care, and go to work, be away from their child with very little help from the male side.